see how good that expensive education of his is. So, right. Without further ado, I will shut up for a second and let you watch this.
No, I didn't. I'm talking about the Boer War had people put in camps for their protection.
Where the British invented the use of concentration camps.
But I'm afraid you're confusing concentration camps with Hitler's extermination camps.
I'm not saying they're the same thing. I'm saying that any concentration camp is de facto an awful thing.
These were people who were interned for their safety. Now, that is not a good thing. I'm not in favour.
Hundreds of thousands of people died.
The death rate was exactly the same as in Glasgow. Death rates 100 years ago were considerably higher than they are now for all sorts of reasons, including...
Murder.
It was not systematic murder. That's simply wrong. I'm not advocating people being taken off their farms and put into camps, but there was a war going on.
Right. So basically that is all you need to hear. It doesn't really say anything more of note. The claims that he has basically made is that people were interned for their safety and that the death rate was no different to the death rate in somewhere like Glasgow at the time. So, who are the Boers, and what's this Boer War that I'm talking about? So, the Boers were a group of Dutch settlers who came from South Africa in the late 18th century to early 19th century. In South Africa. The word Boer is Dutch for farmer, and the name was unfortunately forced upon them when they was made to move north of the Cape by the British Empire. At the time, the British Empire apparently had colonised like a third of the world. So, yeah, not great. The Second Boer War started on the 11th of October 1899 to the 31st of May 1902. It's also known as just the Boer War or the South African War. And it was basically a war that was fought between the British Empire and two independent Boer states, the South African Republic, the Republic of Transvaal, and the Orange Free State. Wait a minute. There we go. So I will next time do this on some kind of like a PowerPoint presentation, I guess. But that's kind of what it looked like. The blue part that you can see there is what was British, and then the orange is the Orange State, and then the one above that is the South African Republic. So yeah, the Boers was rightfully unhappy about the Empire's growing influence in South Africa, but the trigger of the war was ultimately said to be the discovery of diamonds and gold in the Boer states. The Boer republics, or Boer states, were independent, self-governing republics, especially in the last half of the 19th century, by Dutch-speaking inhabitants of the British Cape Colony. But we better know that place today as South Africa. So let me just get that out there. And also, quick side note, a republic, by the way, Latin for public affair, is a form of government in which power is held by the people and elected representatives. In republics, the country is considered a public matter, not the private concern or property of, simply put, kings and queens. So modern republicanism is basically the opposite form of a government to a monarchy. So yeah, with the Boer Republic being a republic, it's kind of no wonder why us Brits, being a monarchy, was getting a little tyrannical. Anyway, despite the valiant efforts, the Boer army were sadly defeated fairly quickly, mainly because their army was literally civilians with guns. Many people call it a guerrilla war, which honestly makes it way more despicable in my opinion, because like it was the full-on British army that was going over there. But this resulted in the Brits moving on to occupy two of the capital cities. By the end of 1900, Field Marshal Roberts, who's a very interesting person, declared the war is over, and he basically left the country. At that point, he handed power over to a chap called Lord Kitchener. You may have heard of him before, but he was a British army officer and a colonial administrator, so not quite as well vetted in the field of war as the field marshal, but he knew what he was doing. So yeah, power got handed over to him. Other guy did one, but the Boers weren't quite finished. After launching a very successful campaign of hit-and-run attacks on British troops, it was very clear that the war was very, very much still going. interesting side note, the Boers used modern rifles and smokeless gunpowder, and they were able to snipe British infantry from up to like 3 miles away before literally vanishing, which I just think is pretty flipping cool. Lord Kitchener, who, like I say, was now in charge, it was in relatively unfamiliar territory. It'd never really been there before, and it was literally surrounded by Boer citizens. And if you remember the part where I said that the army was literally the civilians, it probably was kind of hard to distinguish and made him relatively worried. On the surrounding farmland, there were homes of that women and children of the men out fighting lived in. The British would later learn that these houses on sprawling land were used to supply food and information to the Boers, as well as used as like a network of hiding spots and safe travel routes, connecting many farms together, and honestly to form way much more of a collective. And honestly, I just, for the time, before, you know, like internet and phones and shit, I just think that kind of coordination is just ridiculously good. And all credit to them at that point. But Lord Kitchener's grand 1000 IQ strategy was, and honestly, I genuinely don't like to say this part, but it was to burn the whole place down. This was obviously an act of genocide. I don't know how you can really see it in any other way, but it's not remembered as that. It's not remembered as a genocide. Lord Kitchener is actually gone down in history. It's very revered. Anyway, by the end of the year, at least 8 towns were fully destroyed and thousands of women and children were made homeless. And in July of 1900, the first camp was set up. Initially set up as like a shelter for the families of Boers that had actually surrendered, but they also held families there that had basically still had husbands that was out fighting. So by 1901, over 100,000 people were detained in 34 concentration camps, surrounded by barbed wire fences, guard posts, the whole lock stock. Quick side note, and this is probably why I really wanted to tell this story, but this was the first time concentration camp would ever be used in the English language. So remember that part. And genuinely, that is the part that I find the most shocking. So next time, I wrote this in the script, I didn't know whether I should say it, but seriously, next time you hear a Brit going on about like Hitler and shit, just remind them that he got the idea from us lot in the first place. Anyway, when the term was first brought up in Parliament, the Secretary of War assured the House of Commons that Lord Kitchener was taking care of the refugees, and basically the House of Commons just said, cool, that's fine, go for it. There was no double check, there wasn't no follow-up. Concentration camp at that point wasn't seen as a bad thing. Obviously it wasn't till 50 years later the conventional idea of a concentration camp was established, although these concentration camps, as we are going to later find out, were honestly, like, there wasn't much different, like, so anyway, it wasn't until a lady called Emily Hobhouse, who was an epic feminist and British welfare campaigner, who I genuinely might do one of these on one day, if you're enjoying this, that is, because she has honestly such an amazing story. And yeah, it was basically, because of her that the true extent of these camps was exposed, and the insanely bad living conditions were made public knowledge. And she did like loads of other stuff too, but she's remembered for making these camps public knowledge. In the camps where people were being looked after, families were crammed into little tiny tents that were unbearably warm through the day and soaking wet inside on a night. The water that they drank came from a nearby river that were never boiled, which is ridiculous, and it was also contaminated with raw sewage. So, as you can imagine, diseases like typhoid, measles, mumps, rubella, pneumonia and bronchitis, just to name a few, were endemic at these places. The Brits had this really weird policy to give extra rations to people/families that had surrendered, and take those rations away from the families that still had people out there kind of fighting. So there was like this distinction between families that had surrendered and nobody were fighting, and families that were kind of being held there and still had people out there fighting. And there was basically being held, like I say, because the civilians was an integral part of the war. Anyway, so starvation was rampant. To say that it was rampant is like an understatement. And we are even talking about the 40,000 or so black Africans held in the camps, with no tents and even less food. But anyway, by the end of the war, about 42,000 people died. That was a picture that was widely circulated at the time of what the camps was looking like. By the end of the war, you can't really see that actually, can you? That's not too great. Right. Anyway, I do have sources that you can go and look through afterwards if you can't quite read that. Maybe next time we'll go for a little bit bigger. By the end of the war, about 42,000 people died, the majority of which was under 16. Like I say, Kitchener later went on to be famous, and you might know Kitchener from the World War I recruitment poster where he's like pointing the finger and he's got the tash. So to go back to what Mogg said when he said that there was interned for the protection, I mean, that's not only incredibly misleading, but I think it also shows is just total lack of respect. These places there were no better protected, in those hellholes than anywhere else, and they wouldn't have even had to go there in the first place if it wasn't for the reprehensible acts of the British forces in Kitchener at that time, which, like I say, it was genuinely a genocide. So so to say that it was put there for their own like safety and shit is just absolutely ridiculous. So on to the next claim that Mr. Brain Fog Mogg makes. The death rate was the same as Glasgow at the time. Let's have a little look at that one, shall we? Maybe he's right with this one. Maybe he was, it's 50-50. Here, he's likely referring to the Glasgow health crisis in the 1900s, when it coincided with a small outbreak of bubonic plague. And in that sense, he is kind of right. Like, Glasgow had a very, very poor life expectancy compared to the rest of the UK. So bad, in fact, that it actually has a name, and it's called the Glasgow effect. So he is right. Like, it was really bad in Glasgow at the time, like, for sure. Fun fact, it took a very long time for the Glasgow effect to actually go away, and it's still up for debate whether it even has gone away fully. But with that being said, I should point out that the lady on the panel's claim of hundreds of thousands of people dying was also not quite true, because in fact there was a total of 110,000 Boers and 38,000 Africans that was detained in the camps, which about 40,000 sadly lost their souls in the space of like 2 years. Like I say, most was under the age of 16 too. I mean, and either way is a despicably bad death rate. But when you do the maths, it works out at about 280 people dying per 1,000. So according to Mogg, that's the same in Glasgow, right? No, it won't. just to put it out there. Just in short, it won't. It's true that the plague epidemic did wipe out 1/3 of Europe, but to attribute that to this is false. False at the least, and at the worst, just purposely misleading. Obviously, the bad plague was in the 17th century. In fact, in 1900, the total cases detected by the plague was a staggering 47. Sadly, 15 people did pass on, but it's hardly comparable to what he's trying to compare it to. And if we take a little look using the wonderful power of the internet to see how many people died not even in Glasgow, in Scotland in 1900, we find that they had a population of 762,000, and according to national records, 16.1 thousand people perished. So no, I'm afraid to say he was absolutely wrong. I think that's my last slide. Yeah, that's my last slide. So as you can see there, like literally it says it quite blatantly. And there's a hyperlink there that leads you to the national records. What I will do, wait. Thank you for watching till the end. Bless yous. If I could just add, if you I don't think we watched it to the end, but when Mog says that on that panel, the reaction of the audience is applauding him and like, yeah, go on, Mog. And literally everything that he said in that flipping thing was totally wrong. And it took a dummy like me 10 minutes to debunk it, like seriously. So yeah, that's the show. It wasn't like a ridiculously deep dive. I don't know how long that took us. How long did it take us? Yeah, like 15-20 minutes, which is what I was aiming for. But yeah, I could do longer ones. I can do shorter ones. I've got ones on neuroscience. I've got ones on other like parts of history, but not like wars. I've got all kinds of other things lined up in the future. Right. And I'm sorry if I went through that a little bit quickly. I may have gone through parts a little bit fast there. I just kind of didn't want to bore you and keep you keep you for too much longer. Right, I'm just gonna get to some comments. Thank you for watching, everybody. I appreciate that. Like I said, that was a first attempt, a practice run. I kind of wrote it yesterday, but in future, I do hope to do a lot more of these kinds of things, and you know, do deeper dives into things. I'm boiling right now, but I actually like doing this live. As I was gonna do this as a YouTube episode, but I think doing it live is a little better. I'm obviously gonna work on the way that I've delivered the visual aspect of this. Not ideal, but I've never used PowerPoint in my life, so I'm gonna have to learn how to use like PowerPoint or something, so we can have a proper like presentation sort of thing. And I'm sorry if some of the things that you couldn't. Some of the things that I was trying to show you there you couldn't see. Yeah, these are all things that I will work on for next time. And yes, I am on Red Bull today. Right, sorry. Here we go.